Good morning, Sinai and Daba. How's it? This talk is about guilt. Anybody Jewish here? Probably something we're a little bit familiar with. I'll tell you a story. 10 years ago, my wife and I were in Jerusalem in Israel. I had to sign the contract for my second book. My publisher in those days was in Jerusalem in a place called, just at the entrance to Har Nof. Are you familiar with that area of Jerusalem? It's a little roundabout there. So we arrived a few days early, and so we could have relaxation before we got down to the serious business of signing contracts. And as everybody knows, the entire world hates the state of Israel and detests Israelis. And on that trip, I came to the conclusion that I did too. Now, let me just clarify this. It's not because I have any religious objections to the state of Israel or Israelis. After all, my children, I've got 2 children and grandchildren there. No. It's not that I have political objections. No. It's the way they drive. See, I travel all over the world. I mean, take, for example, the no U-turn sign. In most countries that I go to, the no U-turn sign indicates to people that they're not allowed to make a U-turn. But in the state of Israel, this is merely an indication that this is a particularly good place to make a U-turn. And if some obscure and anonymous fellow has said that you shouldn't do it, are you familiar with that? Anybody here speak Ivrit? That's the first thing you should learn when you're speaking Ivrit. And it's an amazing thing, because in Israel, if you are a millisecond late in putting your foot on the accelerator when the robot has turned green, they honk you into premature deafness. But making a legal move, and I'm British, you know, so I wasn't used to this sort of stuff. And then the next day, my wife and I set off to sign that contract at Har Nof. We'd hired a little car. It was white, of course. All Israeli cars are white. And so we pulled in because I was running out of petrol or gas. What do we call it in South Africa? Petrol. Oh, proper people. Good. Living in New York. Speak weird there. Anyway, so basically there's a little gas station just at the corner. And so after we signed the contract, we pulled in there because I needed to fill up 2 gas pumps. On the right-hand side, there were 2 cars on either side of the gas pump, and two people filling up. On the left-hand side, the first gas pump was occupied, and the guy's filling up, but the one ahead of him was empty. And my little white car, I could sneak just past and get there. And as I did so, something went and flew past me on the left. There's a little guy in a scooter. And he jumped at the pump, jumped off his scooter, put up the seat, because inside is the tank, puts up his helmet, and off he goes to pay. And my wife, is she here? Good. So my wife is from Los Angeles, and she had not seen behavior like this. You don't do that in Los Angeles. And she was really appalled. So she speaks perfect Ivrit. I speak really bad Ivrit. And so when the guy came out to start to fill up his scooter, she put down the window and she said, "Slicha Adoni." Excuse me, sir. That was her first mistake. Efshar lo re'ita. Maybe you didn't see that we were here first. And he looks at her. You know that expression in people's faces when they sniff a bottle of milk to find out if it's fresh? Only to discover that it's cheese. He looked at her with one of those expressions and he says, "Ani kan achshav." I'm here now. My wife was shocked. She comes from Los Angeles. Seeing that her fluent Hebrew approach and Los Angeles temperament didn't work, I decided to use a more traditional Scottish approach, which doesn't actually require a great deal of vocabulary. And I got out of the car. I said, don't go, don't get out of the car. And I went over to him and I sort of said, hey, you, Jimmy. Everybody in Scotland, incidentally, is called Jimmy, even the women. And I started to basically grunt and give him the idea that I was not terribly pleased with his behavior. And he looked at me as I was the second bottle of milk that had gone off that day. And from the other side of the pump, there came a Yiddish boba. And she comes over and she says, Zelo naim, this is not nice. Jews should not fight with each other. And actually, I completely agreed. But he stole my place. But it didn't make any difference because he looked at her as though she was the third bottle of milk that had gone off that day. And I must admit that my view of Israelis at that point was pretty rock bottom. And the next day, my wife and I decided we're going to go to the Kotel Maravi, to the Western Wall. We split up. She went to the ladies' side, I went to the men's side. And we agreed afterwards, after the 20 minutes or so we were going to daven there, to meet again, reconnect on the plaza in front of the Kotel. And when we arrived there, everybody had forgotten about going to pray, going to daven or say Tehillim, because there was an interesting ceremony that was taking place with a group of Israeli soldiers who were doing some sort of swearing-in ceremony. I'm not exactly sure what it was about. Maybe you've been there, maybe you've seen it. And so a large group of Israeli soldiers arrived, and everybody was watching, including us. And you see, maybe it's because I'm British or Scottish. My grandfather fought in the First World War in the Scots Guards. Oh, the Scots Guards, yes. I mean, when you think, you see the blokes standing outside Buckingham Palace, immaculate. I mean, you could comb your hair in the reflection from their boots. The buttons on their tunics would blind you. You have to wear sunglasses. So along came about 100 or so young Israeli soldiers that were told to form a square. It's more like a rhombus. And everybody's watching this, and then the two young officers at the beginning, who were at the middle of the square, who were going to conduct the ceremony, who looked to my eyes as though they were just beyond Bas Mitzvah and no more, stood there and told them to stand at ease. Now, if you think, I'm sure it's the same in your army, the British Army, the Scots Guards, stand at ease. He's like, yeah. There was guys there with their shirts coming out. There was guys there with their shirts out. There was guys wearing sneakers. Do me a favor, how can you be a soldier wearing sneakers? Anyway, there was about 6 soldiers who were wearing guns, the rest weren't wearing guns, and they were supposed to march down the center of the square, then along and then down to salute the 2 captains. And they did that, and they were actually quite smart, which amused the other soldiers enormously. And they're walking past and they're leaning out and going, ooh, is it your food? I was appalled. I thought to myself, this is where U-turning and honking begins. Anyway, so after they did that, then the soldiers were dismissed. And just then, a black limousine pulled into the plaza, the plaza opposite the Kotel. And everybody was interested, who is arriving in this big black car? Maybe it's, somebody really important, like Madonna. So everybody wanted to see who was in. So the car stops, and the door at the back opens, and out comes a guy who's a photographer. He's only about 12 cameras, and then he's looking inside the cavern of the car, and out comes a father wearing a suit and a tie. You always know something big's going on in Israel when a man's wearing a tie. And then he looked inside, and the photographer's clicking away, and out came a kala, a Jewish bride. A Yemeni girl, petite, stunningly beautiful, in her gorgeous white dress. This in her special day, in her big day. She was there to pray at the Kotel, that her life together with her chatan, with her husband-to-be, would be blessed. And she started to walk towards the hotel with her father and the photographer walking ahead of them taking pictures. And all the soldiers saw this, and they all wanted a picture with the bride. It's an amazing thing, you know, they couldn't be bothered to get into straight lines for the solemn swearing-in ceremony. But to get into this picture with this girl, they formed, you can see this on my Facebook page, they formed beautiful, beautiful lines behind. This gorgeous Kala standing in the middle. And the photographer's taking a picture, and they all started to sing. And they were jumping up and down. You know what they were singing? Anachnu maminim b'nei maminim. We are believers in Hashem, just like our fathers were believers in Hashem, and they're dancing up and down. And I looked at that, and I saw that. Ladies and gentlemen, I felt profoundly ashamed of myself. I was looking at the external. I was looking at the outside. I was comparing them to the Scots Guards. But these brave young Israelis, these brave young Jewish kids willing to give up their life to protect people like me, and I was judging them because they didn't look quite as smart as the Scots Guards. Felt profoundly ashamed, profoundly guilty. But not all guilt is bad. In fact, guilt can be an extraordinarily good thing. If, basically, I can take you back to another story, because we tend to judge people by their external appearances, do we not? We tend to be judged by our appearances, which is why I didn't wear my kilt today. There's a very interesting Gemara that's in the Gemara is in Brochus, and it's Daf Hey, page 5, and it says, Al tadin chavercha, don't judge your fellow man or woman until you reach their place. What does it mean, reach their place? That's normally translated, as I'm sure you might have heard it, until you're standing in their shoes. That's not what it says. It says, until you reach their place. What's a person's place? The great Rabbi Dessler, he says that the person's place is who you are as a consequence of absolutely everything that went into making your life. When you were born, were you healthy? Were you not? The first challenge you'll ever face in life is your parents. Did you have good parents? Did you have average parents? Did you have poor parents? And then you had siblings. Were your siblings helpful? Or was your big sister jealous rotten at the arrival of the new baby sister, and whenever she took you out on the stroller for a walk, kept accidentally dropping you on the concrete on your head? And then your school, it's like all of that, your experiences, all of that goes to make up who you are. And it says, don't judge somebody until you reach their place. Can you ever reach somebody's place? Can you ever judge somebody? I remember when I used to be the campus rabbi for the University of Manchester, in fact 14 universities in the northwest of England, and at the same time I was working for a seminary called Neve Yerushalayim, which is a seminary in Yerushalayim for young ladies who have not a strong Jewish learning background who want to catch up. Excellent place. I got a phone call one day from a mother who said that her daughter was interested in attending the seminary. I'm the guy who processes these applications. Could they come to meet us? So I said, yeah, of course. So I arranged for them to come on Wednesday morning to my office, I think it was 10 o'clock, in the Hillel house. And when I arrived there, they'd come early. And when I entered my office, I was struck. You'll see why in a second I'm telling you this. I was struck by the appearance of the mother. Now, I'm an Orthodox guy. I'm really incredibly, incredibly frum. I don't even know that women exist. And when I say women, I mean non-men. And so I came into the office, but I was struck by the appearance of the mother. The mother was stunningly beautiful. I guess I can't remember now. I think she was about 40. And she was stunningly beautiful. And the reason that her beauty was so obvious, and you'll see why I'm telling you this in a second, was because her daughter, the one who wanted to go to Sim, by comparison, was not beautiful. She was plain. And if I'm being really honest, she wasn't even plain. But who cares? we're interested in what's inside. We're interested in the person, and she was a lovely girl. And off she went to seminary. I processed. I must tell you, there was an alarm bell ringing, but I couldn't quite put my finger on the alarm bell, what it was. But it was something, couldn't find out, something wrong. But look, I had to send girls to the seminary. I get brownie points for this. Filled in the form, off she went, spent 6 months. It was a complete and total disaster. She came back to Manchester. I tried to get in touch with the girl. I wasn't able to make contact with the girl. I'd heard through the grapevine she was now seriously involved in drugs, had become a prostitute. And then, another 6 months after that, that's a year later, I got a phone call to say that she was in a hospital. She tried to commit suicide. And now, somebody said I now could get to the girl. So I went to see the girl, went into the ward. It was a NHS, National Health Service ward. It was about 14 beds. I saw her at the end of the ward. I started to walk towards her, and she saw me, and she hid underneath the blanket. So I got beside the bed, and I sat down, and I said, Sarah, it's Rabbi YY. And from underneath the blanket, she said, I know, please go away. I said, Sarah, don't be silly. Come out from underneath the blanket. She said, would you please just go away? I said, this is ridiculous. She said, I'm just too ashamed. Please go away. I said, there's nothing to be ashamed about. Would you please just go away? I said, okay. I'm leaving my card beside your bed. If you need me at all, give me a call. And so I went away. The next night she phoned me. She'd been transferred to a psychiatric hospital for an assessment to see whether or not she posed a risk to herself, a further risk to herself. And I, of course, went to the psychiatric hospital. I have to tell you, as a rabbi, going to the psychiatric hospital is the part of my job I hate the most. As soon as I walk in there, I'm surrounded by poor people who are all insistent in telling me that I'm Jesus. Or they are. Or we both are. And there's no point in telling them that I'm not. So I just ask for checks. And when I got there, the alarm bell that was ringing when I was processing the girl's application suddenly came into context because she explained her story. You remember I told you that the girl's mother was extremely beautiful and that the girl wasn't. You see, if the girl's mother was extremely beautiful when she was a woman of 40, can you imagine what she looked like when she was a young lady of 19, which is when she got married? She was jaw-droppingly beautiful. And a year later, she gave birth to her first child, a baby girl. This baby girl. But unlike the jaw-droppingly beautiful mother, the girl was an ugly duckling. A year later, she had another baby girl. But this baby girl, like the mother, was stunningly beautiful. In the mother's mind, she only had one daughter. When she went to the mall, she took the beautiful daughter with her to shop in the mall. When she went on vacation, she took the beautiful daughter on vacation. The other one was left with a grandmother or an uncle or an aunt or anybody. And you see, that was the alarm bell, because in all my professional life dealing with young Jews who want to go and study more about their religion to a place like Or Sameach or Neve or something like that, no parent is happy when their child wants to do that. They're scared stiff. They're right. It's our job, it's the kid's job to reassure the parents, don't worry, I'm going to be the same person. In fact, I'm going to be a better son or a better daughter. Don't worry, you're not losing me. But I could understand when the parents are unhappy, but that's the problem. That was the alarm bell. The mother wanted the girl to go to seminary. She was keen for the girl to go to seminary. Of course she was. She was keen for the girl to go anywhere, as long as it was out of her life. I said I'd come back the next night. When I came back the next night, she discharged herself. This girl from a traditional United Synagogue English type background eventually ended up in a Christian cult in London. I somehow got hold of the phone number. I do not know how. I don't know how to do this today. And I managed to phone, and they actually let me speak to her. So I said, Sarah, it's Rabbi YY. And she says, I know. I said, Sarah, I'd like to come to London to speak to you. And she said, YY, I like you. And I know you like me, but you don't have the time that I need. And of course she was right. How much time do you think it would take to repair the damage to a 21-year-old girl or 22-year-old girl who had suffered 22 years of neglect and rejection from the person who should have given them most love and most affection in the world? Another 22 years? 24/7? Of course I didn't have the time. But cult members have nothing but time, particularly for a Jew. But if I told you the story, I missed out a big chunk of the story. Suppose I missed out the middle bit of this girl from a traditional background and she ended up in this Christian cult in London, etc. And people always ask me what happened to her. I don't know. But what would you say? Oh, it's ridiculous. It's terrible. She ended up there. Don't judge somebody until you reach their place. That's what it says. Now, do we judge people? Of course. We've got a Bet Din, we've got a Sanhedrin at the time of the temple. We do judge people and we punish people because if people are stealing, the money has to be given back. If people are physically abusing people, that has to be stopped. If people are sexually abusing people, that has to be violently stopped. But what made the person into the thief or the violent person or the abuser? That you can never know. The actions, therefore, we judge. Well, what made the person, that we can never know. So there's two types of guilt. There's a guilt that makes you feel regret in a positive direction, like I felt about those Israeli soldiers, or my reaction to those Israeli soldiers. And then there's other guilt that just tears you down. In fact, King David says an amazing thing. You know, this Gemara I was talking about in Brachas on page 5, it says an amazing thing. When something goes wrong in your life, yefashpesh b'maisav, examine your deeds. If something goes wrong in your life, and this is the classic license for Jewish guilt. The rabbis say, examine your life. Did you do something to justify this? So this is the formula. This is what the Talmud says. Something goes wrong in your life, ask yourself, did you ever do something wrong that could have provoked that from heaven? And if the answer to that is no, then you've got to say, well, is there something positive, something good I should have done that I failed to do? And if the answer to that is no, then you've got to assume that what you're going through is Yisurim Shalahava. God's giving him these difficult experiences because he loves you. Love it. I will be talking more about that this afternoon at 2 o'clock. Now, but I'd just like us to consider this Gemara for a little moment. Does this make any sense? I'll just make it myself. Something goes wrong in my life, which has never happened. Something goes wrong in my life, and I say to myself, why? Have you possibly ever done anything wrong that could have justified the suffering and difficulties you're going through? No. In that case, why? Has there ever been anything good that you should have done that you failed to do? No. Well, in that case, it's because God loves you. I mean, if you ever doubted that the rabbis have a sense of humor, this is it. Put your hand up if you're going to get past number 1. Anybody ever done nothing wrong in their life? What's this talking about? Who's going to get to stage 2, let alone stage 3? This is bonkers. However, what it really means is this. You know, King David says a very interesting thing. L'cho Hashem chesed. To you, God, there is chesed, kindness. Ki atu shalom leish k'masehu. Because you pay a person back for his or her deeds, measure for measure. It's called mida keneged mida. What you do wrong, then the same thing happens to you, or can happen to you. And King David says that's a kindness. What the Gemara therefore is saying, when something goes wrong and you say, did I ever do anything? It doesn't mean did you ever do anything wrong. We all have done things that are wrong. We are humans. I spoke about that last night. But have you ever done anything wrong like this? Does it match? That's what it means. That's when if you can say no, then you go to the next stage. But if it's just that you've never done anything wrong, we'll never get past to the next stage. Did you fail to do something right? Are you with me on this? Tell you a story. When I finished in Cowlow in Liverpool, I was in Cowlow in Liverpool. Do you know where our Cowlow was? Penny Lane. Wicked! In Penny Lane, there is a barber. There's no barber in Penny Lane. There's no fire station. but it was some rabbis learning Torah. And when I moved from Liverpool to Manchester, I was doing 4 jobs: Rabbi Yerushalayim, working for a Sameach, teaching in a yeshiva, and teaching in the Beis Yaakov Frum school. Now I have to tell you, I how should I put this? When I was about to become a father for the first time, I was a wee bit worried, because I am an only child, or as I prefer to think of myself, unique. And the problem is, being a father, I didn't see any brothers being brought up, and so therefore, how do you do dadding? But I could, I suppose, base it on my own upbringing, because I used to be a boy. But when my first daughter arrived, total and absolute crisis. Girls are different to boys. And when I taught in the yeshiva teaching boys, well, if a boy misbehaves in class, he's, "You! Stop that!" And you do it in a Scottish accent. They go, but if you do that to a girl, they cry. They cry at you. It's their secret weapon. And I was teaching. Now, I was getting up because of these 4 jobs, and I was still living in Liverpool, so I had to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, which, incidentally, before then, I didn't even know there was such a time as 5 o'clock in the morning, and drive to Manchester, and then Daven, and then anyway, and I was really, really tired, and I went in, and I was teaching a class of girls, about 14 years of age, and I was explaining a certain Jewish law, and the Jewish law is, just on Shabbat, I just thought I'd show off and pretend I'm a rabbi. If you have a light source which is an adjustable flame, like a lantern, on Shabbat you're not allowed to study by that light source, because you might forget for a moment that it's Shabbat and adjust the flame, which you're not allowed to do. And this is what I was explaining to the girls. And then I said, now there is a contemporary question, a contemporary she'elah, which emerges and evolves from this primary Jewish concept. What would this be? Dimmer switches. When you can, if you're in a room, which is the light source, you can dim it. Can you study in that room on Shabbat? I said, yes, of course. There's no problem whatsoever. We are worried that the split second that might take you to forget, to adjust the flame, you could forget it's Shabbos. But we're not really concerned that the amount of time it's going to take you to get up and walk across that you'll forget it's Shabbat. They're all nodding. And the girl put up her hand and said, Rabbi Rubinstein, what about dimmer switches? As they say in America, duh. This I had just explained. And she had demonstrated that she had paid no attention whatsoever. And because I'd been up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and because I had a headache, and because I was tired, I said to her, forgetting that girls are different. See, this would have worked with a boy, but not for a girl. I said to her, what's wrong? Did you leave your brain at home? Oh, much worse. Didn't your lobotomy work? Well, I was young. Anyway, I then turned to the blackboard. We had blackboards. And I started to write on the blackboard. And of course, the girl burst into tears. And I sort of saw this, and I felt absolutely horrible. And then I finished the lesson 5 minutes early, and I said, I'd like to apologize to Sarah. Incidentally, she's now married to my Rosh Hashiva's son, so I'm very glad I apologized. I was completely wrong. But I'd like you to imagine that I did not notice that she was crying, and I start writing on the blackboard, and it takes me a while to turn back. Now, by this time, all the girls have calmed her down, and she's dried her eyes, and I don't see it, so I leave the class, and then they all discuss how evil I am. And then a week later, the principal of the school, who was called Rabbi Young, he's sitting down having, with the staff, a discussion about how we're going to divide up use of the library given the new syllabus. And I'm sitting thinking about my forthcoming vacation in the Highlands of Scotland as he blabs on, blah, blah, blah. And then I say, excuse me, headmaster, how am I going to divide up use of the library with regards to the new syllabus? And he says to me, what's wrong? Did you leave your brain at home? Didn't your lobotomy work? Well, if the same thing happens to me and it hurts, then I might just connect the dots and think, that's what I did to that girl last week. And if I'm a mensch, then I can go and apologize. Because sometimes we hurt people without even realizing it. So when the same thing happens to us that we do to somebody else, it's not a bad thing. King David says it's a chesed. So when you realize when you've done something wrong and you feel guilt, and the guilt motivates you to something positive, a positive reaction, it's good guilt. But if it's a guilt that only tears you down and only depresses you and makes you feel no self-worth, then it's bad guilt. Good guilt comes from there because it allows you to become better. Bad guilt comes from there because all it does is tear you down. So if you want to know if you're feeling guilty and you're Jewish, because of course you're feeling guilty, but it's a guilt that's positive and is meant to be so that you can be a better person, then it's from there. But if you're feeling a bit guilty about something and all it's doing is tearing you down, then it's from that other place and the other guy down there. I remember I was teaching in a girls' seminary in Manchester, and a girl, French girl, came to see me. I used to have a little sort of like consulting office, and she sat down, and I said, "Bonjour." That's French, and that's about the limit. And she said, "Bonjour." I said, "Comment ça va?" And she looked very sad. I said, "Sad? Triste? What's wrong?" "Stomach cancer." "What?" "Stomach cancer. That's not a good cancer to get." I said, "Stomach cancer?" And then I thought to myself, something wrong with this scenario. Why is she sitting talking to a rabbi? Why isn't she in hospital? I said, "How do you know you've got stomach cancer?" "Stomach pains." "Have you been to see a doctor?" "No." "So how do you know you got stomach cancer?" This girl is a rabbi's daughter from Israel. 2 weeks ago, there was a break. She was back home. She was standing at a bus stop. There was a boy there, a known girl. He started to speak to her. She spoke back. That was it. Stomach cancer. Now, we've been studying a book called Mesilat Yesharim, which is one of the classic ethical and Musar works, in which he says that a person should be, logically, that if you do something to annoy God, then really, it's God, you're thunderbolts and you're dead. But that's not how it works. Not at all. Even, says the Mesilat Yesharim, if a person commits adultery, we consider that a bad thing. Or murder, that's a bad thing. God can forgive you for both of those. So I said to her, "We learnt that together, yes?" "Yes." So I said, if God can forgive you for murder or adultery, I suspect he might be able to overlook the fact you told the fellow that it's 3 o'clock when he asked you for the time. And here is the most incredible words, because think about this logically. Suppose before 1963 and the free availability of the contraceptive pill, there's a strong possibility that adultery will bring into the world a life that doesn't belong here. If you kill somebody, you've taken from the world a life that should be here. So how could it be that when you regret it, when you feel guilty about it and sad about it, how could it possibly be that it's forgiven? The slate's wiped clean. And here's the Hebrew. Hashem considers akiras haratzon ka'akirat hamasa. The removal of the desire for the thing is as though the thing never happened. What do you mean the thing never happened? There's a baby there, there's a dead body there. So the answer is really quite simple. Because the Rambam famously says, how do you know if you've succeeded in changing yourself? If you become a Baal or Balat Tshuva? And he uses a case of a sexual crime. There's a guy in his office, there's a beautiful secretary, and she's stunningly attractive, and there's nobody there, and she's very interested in him, and he's very interested in her, despite the fact he's happily married, and he's overwhelmed, and you know how this ends up. And then he regrets it, and he does teshuvah. The Rambam's language is very critical here. He says, 2 weeks later, he's in the exact same circumstance. Same beautiful girl, same level of attraction, same level of availability. And this time he doesn't commit adultery with the girl. But if he's just as attracted to her, she's just as available, and the circumstances are precisely identical, what's changed? Well, what's changed? He's changed. The person who committed the crime no longer exists. Externally, he might look the same. It might be a twin. But he's not the same. And God knows that you've changed. So if you find yourself in circumstances and you don't repeat the crime, you know you're about to. He's not telling you to put yourself in circumstances to see if you would repeat it. But if you find yourself, and then you know you can change. Guilt can be a positive thing, something that allows us to become better people. I remember I used to spend a lot of time writing programs and appearing in programs for the BBC and TV and radio. A regular one of my TV shows was called the Heaven and Earth Show, and it was a Sunday morning religious-based show. And once I had to appear with a lady, and the subject we were talking about was forgiveness. This lady, a non-Jewish lady, her sister had been murdered by a husband and wife serial killer team called Fred and Rosemary West. They found, when they eventually discovered him, 30 bodies buried underneath his house, young women. They figure that he and his wife killed about 120 girls before they were caught. I won't go into the appalling things they did to them before they actually murdered them. Her sister was one of the victims. And we were discussing forgiveness. And when it came to forgiveness, she said an amazing thing. She had been to the United States of America. There's a conference that happens every year for people who've lost close family members to murder. So if you lost a parent, or you lost, God forbid, a child, you lost a sibling, etc., then people come together. And sadly, in some states, with crazy gun laws, etc., then murder is a growth industry. And so she'd been to 3. And there were psychologists and psychiatrists, and there was counselors, and there were priests, and everything you can imagine. There was sessions of 12-step groups with people you could share your experiences with. And the first year it was very nice, but hadn't really done anything. The second year was very nice, but hadn't done anything. But she'd just come back from her 3rd year. And when she came back from her 3rd year, she heard somebody who said something which completely changed her life. And that was, forgiveness means giving up the hope of a better past. Forgiveness means giving up the hope of a better past. Because when something went wrong in our lives, don't we replay the whole thing over and over again, tearing ourselves down, only this time hoping for some new outcome, something that's going to be different? Forgiveness means giving up the hope of a better past. And I've got a very good friend called Rabbi Jonathan Dove. He's originally from Johannesburg. He's a clinical psychologist now in London. I told him this, and he phoned me up a week later. He said he had 6 clients, whom he had no progress with at all over a period of a year. And when he said, when I told him your magic words, which weren't mine, it was this lady's, suddenly he made progress. People had started to allow themselves to forgive themselves. Let me finish by telling you something which I think is important. There's a Jewish idea, whenever you do teshuvah, whenever you change your life, and all the negative things that went before become mitzvahs, all the averas, all the bad things you do. It's not just that the slate's wiped clean, but they become mitzvahs. And I suppose because when you regretted it, when you felt guilty and you used it in a positive direction, then that became the springboard. The bad thing that you did was the springboard to make you into the better person. So of course it becomes a mitzvah. But my wife and I was lecturing in San Jose about 3 years ago. We got off the plane, and there was one of these walkways in the airport. And as we were walking along the walkway, there was glass display cases from a local university, and they had in them broken clay pots. And this whole exhibition was in the Japanese, Chinese, and Korean art of kintsukuroi. Has anybody heard of kintsukuroi? I'd never heard of it before. In Japanese and Chinese philosophy, the history of the thing, the history of an object, is part of the object. So when it's broken, they repair it. Now, a red or a grey clay pot is frankly a pretty mundane and pretty boring object, I think you would agree. And the amazing thing is when they glue them together, they use a lacquer which has got pure gold dust in it. And so they put this lacquer, this glue with gold dust, and when they put it back together, there were veins running through this red, boring pot, which makes it no longer look boring. There was one pot that clearly dropped and suffered catastrophic damage. It had hundreds of veins as the tiny pieces had all been glued together with this gold lacquer. And it was stunning. It became a work of art because of every vein that was now repaired, brought back together. It shone. It was gold. So we're Jewish. We're used to feeling guilt, whether we prejudge people in Israel or we prejudge young ladies because of their external appearance, or people judge us by our appearance. Or we judge ourselves and we don't let ourselves off the hook. Here's the rule. If the guilt that you feel provokes you to change and become a better person, then everything you did wrong becomes a mitzvah. And you glow, and you shine. You're like these pots. Check them out. Google them in the next break. Look at what they look like. They're stunning. You take a mundane, ordinary thing, a broken thing. Sometimes we're that mundane, broken thing. And then with real guilt, which is turned in a positive direction, it turns into a work of art. You turn into a work of art. If it's guilt that just tears you down, that's from the guy downstairs. That has to be rejected. But if it makes you a better person, then guilt's a good thing. King David says it's a chesed to regret the things you've done wrong. And even when things happen to you, to provoke you to regret the things wrong, that's a chesed. Because inside every single one of you is a work of art. And if there's a stain, if there's a blemish, that can be repaired. If you've been fractured, if you've been broken, you can be put back together again. Certainly you can be put back together again with help of an artist. The most important thing I ever teach is what it says in Pirkei Avot. Asa lecho rav. Get yourself a rabbi, get yourself a Rubinstein, get yourself a mentor, get yourself a teacher. The most important project in your life is your life, is you. If you've been broken, if you regret it and can't put yourself back together again, I promise you, when you do, you become a work of art. And if you can't do it yourself, get a rabbi, get a Rubinstein, get a mentor, get a professional who can help you to shine. And every crack will be filled with gold as you become the work of art that you truly are.